The planet Kepler 442c was like nothing humans had ever seen before. Purple trees stretched toward twin suns, their branches glowing with soft light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Crystal formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, catching and splitting the alien sunlight into rainbow patterns that danced across the forest floor. For over 300 years, the tall blue-skinned Rilthani had watched this world from their floating research stations high above the clouds. They had cataloged every creature, mapped every territory, and recorded thousands of hours of footage, but they had never once set foot in those glowing forests below. The reason was simple: the Grimscales. These weren't ordinary predators. Grimscales stood 8 feet tall at the shoulder with 6 powerful legs that could crush boulders and claws that could slice through metal. Their armored hides changed color to match their surroundings, making them nearly invisible until they struck. Most terrifying of all, they hunted in coordinated packs using complex strategies that had puzzled Rilthani scientists for generations. The research stations orbiting the planet were filled with warnings written in the flowing script of the Rilthani language. No surface contact permitted. Grimscale predation rate, 100%. No known survivors of direct encounter. The aliens had built their entire understanding of the planet on this single, unshakable fact. Nothing could survive face-to-face contact with a Grimscale. This belief had kept them alive for centuries. It would also nearly cost a little human girl her life. The human transport ship Star Pioneer had been carrying 300 colonists to a new world when disaster struck. Deep in space, warning lights began flashing across the bridge as the main engine sputtered and died. Captain Rodriguez tried everything, but the ship was falling toward the nearest planet whether they wanted to or not. All passengers to emergency pods. The announcement echoed through the corridors as families grabbed their children and rushed to safety. The evacuation was chaotic but mostly successful. Pod after pod launched from the dying ship, carrying frightened humans toward the glowing world below. But in all that chaos, mistakes happened. 6-year-old Park Hana had been holding her mother's hand when the ship shuddered violently. The impact threw her sideways, and when she looked up, her parents were gone. The corridor was empty except for flashing red lights and the sound of her own crying echoing off the metal walls. "Yama? Appa?" she called out in Korean, using the words for mother and father that felt more natural when she was scared, but only silence answered back. By the time she found her way to the escape pods, the last one was already launching. Through a small window, she could see it falling toward the purple planet below like a shooting star. She was alone on a dead ship, falling toward a world that no alien had ever survived. When her parents, Kim Dojin and Lee Minji, reached the surface, their first thought was finding their daughter. They had searched every face in their landing group twice, asked every family, checked every name on every list. Hana wasn't there. "She has to be in another pod," Minji kept saying, but her voice shook with fear. "She has to be." Dojin held his wife close as they watched the other pods land across the crystal plains. One by one, the groups reported in over the radio. No sign of their little girl anywhere. That's when the Rilthani rescue ships arrived. The alien vessels descended from the sky like floating jewels, their hulls reflecting the planet's strange light. Commander Vextel stepped out first, his 7-foot frame making the humans look like children. His skin was the color of deep ocean water, and his large eyes held an intelligence that had been studying the universe since before humans learned to make fire. "We detected your ship's descent," he said in perfect English, though his voice carried a musical quality that sounded almost like singing. "We have prepared temporary shelters and will arrange transport to the nearest human colony within the week." "Our daughter is missing," Dojin said immediately. "She wasn't in any of the pods that landed here." The commander's expression grew serious. He consulted a device that projected floating symbols in the air. "Our sensors detected one additional pod that landed in the deep forest, approximately 40 kilometers from here." Minji grabbed his arm. "Then we need to go get her right now." But Vextal gently pulled away, his crystalline features reflecting sadness. "I am sorry. The deep forest is Grimscale territory. Nothing survives there. If your child landed in those woods, she's already gone. You don't know that, Dojin shouted. She could be hiding, waiting for rescue. We cannot risk a rescue team for someone who is certainly dead, the commander replied. The Grimscales hunt anything that moves. Our records show no exceptions. I am truly sorry for your loss. Meanwhile, 40 kilometers away, little Hana was very much alive. She had crawled out of her damaged escape pod just as the alien sunset was painting the crystal forest in shades of gold and purple. Her emergency kit contained water tablets, nutrition bars, a first aid package, and a flashlight that would last for days. She wasn't completely helpless, but she was completely alone. The forest around her pulsed with gentle light as strange creatures moved through the underbrush. She could hear running water somewhere nearby and decided to follow the sound. Her father had always told her that following water downstream would eventually lead to people. As she walked through the glowing plants, pushing aside curtains of hanging moss that sparkled like diamonds, she had no idea that every step was being tracked by something far larger and more dangerous than anything that had ever lived on Earth. Hana had spent her first night on the alien world curled up under a fallen tree trunk, using her small backpack as a pillow. The strange forest sounds had kept her awake for hours. Clicking noises from the glowing plants, distant calls from creatures she couldn't see, and the constant whisper of wind through the crystal formations. But eventually, exhaustion won over fear, and she fell into a deep sleep. She woke up to the feeling of being watched. Opening her eyes slowly, Hana found herself staring at the biggest animal she had ever seen in her life. It was massive, easily the size of the elephants she'd seen in picture books, but completely different in every other way. 6 thick legs supported its enormous body, each one ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through stone. Its hide was covered in natural armor plates that shifted color from deep purple to silver as she watched, while patches along its sides glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The creature's head was enormous, with intelligent, golden eyes that seemed to study her with curiosity rather than hunger. Steam rose from its nostrils in the cool morning air, and when it breathed, she could hear a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its chest. Most people would have screamed. Most people would have run. Most people would have assumed they were about to die. But Hana wasn't most people. At 6 years old, she hadn't yet learned that some things were supposed to be impossible. "Hello there, big guy," she whispered, sitting up slowly so she wouldn't startle the creature. "Are you watching me sleep?" The Grimscale tilted its massive head, those golden eyes blinking once. The rumbling sound grew a little louder, almost like the purring of the world's largest cat. As Hana looked more carefully at the creature, she noticed something that made her heart ache with sympathy. Dark liquid was seeping from several deep cuts along the animal's left side, staining its armored hide. The wounds looked fresh and painful, probably from fighting with another creature. "Oh no, you're hurt," she said, completely forgetting to be afraid. "Those cuts look really bad." She stood up slowly, keeping her movements gentle and non-threatening. The Grimscale watched her but didn't move away as she approached. When she was close enough to touch its side, she could see that the wounds were deep gashes, probably from the claws of another Grimscale. "My appa taught me how to clean cuts," she said softly, reaching into her emergency kit for the medical supplies. "He's a doctor, and he always says that dirty wounds get infected. We need to clean these up for you." The creature made that deep rumbling sound again, and Hana decided it sounded friendly rather than threatening. She had always been good with animals back on Earth. Her family had owned 2 cats, a dog, and even a rabbit that she had rescued from their neighbor's garden. "I'm going to call you Bomb," she announced as she pulled out antiseptic wipes and medical tape. "You make such nice sounds like boom, 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 but softer. Bomb fits you perfectly." Working carefully, she began cleaning the wounds. The antiseptic must have stung, but Bomb remained perfectly still, only occasionally making soft huffing sounds that almost seemed like sighs of relief. His skin was warm under her small hands, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. "There we go," she murmured as she applied the medical tape to hold gauze pads over the worst cuts. That should help them heal better. My appa always says that taking care of injuries right away is very important. When she finished bandaging his wounds, Bomb lowered his massive head until it was level with hers. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. A tiny human girl and a creature that could have crushed her without even trying. Then her stomach growled loudly. "Oh, excuse me," she said, embarrassed. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." She pulled out one of her nutrition bars and unwrapped it, breaking off a small piece to eat. The bars weren't very tasty, but they had all the vitamins and nutrients a person needed to stay healthy. As she chewed the bland food, she noticed Bomb watching her intently. "Are you hungry too?" she asked. "I don't know what you like to eat, but you can try some of this if you want." She held out half of the nutrition bar in her palm. Bomb sniffed it carefully, then used his surprisingly gentle tongue to pick it up. He chewed thoughtfully for a moment, then made a sound that could only be described as pleased. "You like it?" Hana laughed. "That's funny. Most kids think these taste terrible." What happened next amazed her. Bomb stood up and walked over to a nearby tree, one that towered so high above them that Hana couldn't see the top. Using his incredible height and long neck, he reached up to branches that were at least 20 feet off the ground. When he came back, he was carrying a cluster of purple fruit in his mouth. He dropped the fruit gently at her feet, then nudged it toward her with his enormous nose. "For me?" Hana asked, picking up one of the fruits. It was about the size of an apple but softer, with skin that felt like velvet. When she bit into it, sweet juice ran down her chin. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. "This is amazing," she said, eating the fruit quickly. "Thank you, Bomb. You're so smart." High above the planet's surface in the Rilthani monitoring stations, alarms were going off. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Kylmar, staring at the readings on his screen. "The sensors are showing a grim scale exhibiting protective behavior toward a human child." His colleague, Dr. Nexwin, shook her head firmly. "The equipment must be malfunctioning. Grim scales don't exhibit protective behavior toward anything except their own offspring. They're pure predators." "But look at these readings," Kylmar insisted. The creature brought food to the human. It's staying close to her instead of hunting. This contradicts everything we know about their behavior. "Then, our instruments are broken," Nexwin replied dismissively. "Schedule a maintenance check on all surface monitoring equipment. There must be some kind of interference from the crystal formations." But down on the planet's surface, something impossible was happening. A little human girl was making friends with one of the galaxy's most feared predators, armed with nothing but kindness, medical tape, and a willingness to see past appearances to the gentle soul underneath. Neither Hana nor Bomb knew they were rewriting the rules of interspecies contact. They were just two lonely creatures who had found each other in a vast, dangerous world and decided they were better off together. Living in the crystal forest was like being inside a fairy tale, but one where the trees glowed purple and the flowers sang in the wind. Hana had been with Bomb for 5 days now, and each day brought new discoveries about her unusual companion. She quickly learned that Bomb was much smarter than any animal she had ever known. When his ears pointed straight forward and his whole body went still, it meant he had heard or smelled something important. When he made those deep, gentle rumbling sounds in his chest, it meant he was happy and relaxed. But when his rumbles turned into sharp huffs, it was time to be careful because danger was nearby. "You're like a big dog," she told him on their 3rd morning together as she braided small flowers into the longer fur around his neck. "Except you're about 100 times bigger, and you can reach fruit that grows way up high." Bomb seemed to enjoy the attention, lowering his massive head so she could reach better. His golden eyes would half close when she scratched behind his ears, and sometimes he would make a sound that was almost like a sigh of contentment. But the most amazing thing was how he responded to her voice. She discovered this by accident, when Bomb was drinking from a stream, and she spotted a snake-like creature with too many eyes slithering toward them through the undergrowth. "Bomb, wait!" she called out instinctively. Immediately, the huge creature lifted his head from the water and looked at her completely alert. When she pointed at the strange snake thing, Baum positioned himself between Hana and the potential threat until it slithered away into the bushes. From that moment on, she realized that Baum actually understood her words, not just her tone of voice. When she said stop, he would freeze in place. When she said go, he would start moving again. When she said his name, he would always look directly at her, no matter what else was happening around them. "I wish I could understand you too," she said one evening as they settled down for the night. "I bet you have lots of interesting things to say." By the fourth day, Hana had made a decision that would have terrified any adult who knew about grimscales, but seemed perfectly logical to a 6-year-old girl. "Baum, I need to find my parents," she announced as she finished eating the sweet purple fruit he had brought her for breakfast. "They're probably really worried about me and I miss them." She looked up at his broad back, which was easily as wide as her bed back home had been. "Do you think, could I ride on you? I promise I won't. Pull your fur or kick you or anything like that." Baum seemed to consider this request seriously. He lowered himself down until his belly almost touched the ground, making it easier for her to climb up. Hana grabbed handfuls of his thick fur and pulled herself onto his back, settling herself just behind his powerful shoulders. "This is amazing," she laughed, sitting up straighter. "I can see everything from up here." When Baum stood up to his full height, Hana found herself nearly 12 feet off the ground. The forest looked completely different from this perspective. She could see over bushes and small trees, spot the glittering stream that wound through the valley, and even make out what looked like smoke rising in the distance. "That way," she said, pointing toward the smoke. "That might be where the other people are." What happened next would have been impossible according to every scientific study the real Thani had ever conducted. Baum began walking through the forest, with impossible care, each massive step placed precisely to avoid holes, rocks, or unstable ground that might unseat his small rider. When they came to a fallen tree blocking their path, he would either step carefully over it or find a way around, always making sure Hana remained safe and secure on his back. His movements were so smooth that riding him felt more like floating than walking. Even when they crossed rough terrain or climbed steep hills, Hana never felt like she might fall. It was as if Baum was constantly aware of her presence and adjusted every movement to keep her comfortable. "You're the best friend ever," she told him, leaning forward to pat his neck. "Even better than my friend Jiwoo back home, and she let me borrow her favorite doll for a whole week." But their peaceful journey was interrupted on the second day of traveling together. They were following the stream through a narrow valley when 3 other grimscales appeared on the ridges above them. These creatures were different from Baum, somehow more aggressive, with darker coloring and scars across their hides that spoke of many battles. The lead grimscale roared a challenge that echoed off the crystal formations like thunder. Hana felt Baum's muscles tense beneath her as he responded with his own roar. But this sound was nothing like the gentle rumbles she was used to. This was the voice of a predator warning others to stay away from what he protected. "It's okay, Baum," Hana said quickly, sensing the tension in her friend's body. "They probably just want to know who we are." But the other grimscales didn't seem interested in peaceful introductions. They began moving down the slopes toward Baum and Hana, their claws leaving gouges in the crystal-studded earth. Baum's protective instincts flared to life, and Hana could feel him preparing to fight. "No, Baum," she said firmly, leaning forward, to speak directly into his ear. "We don't need to fight them, they're just scared because they don't understand." She raised her voice, calling out to the approaching grimscales in the same gentle tone she used with Baum. "Hi there, I'm Hana, and this is my friend Baum. We're just passing through. We don't want any trouble." The 3 creatures stopped, clearly confused by the sight of a small human addressing them calmly while riding one of their own kind. Baum remained tense beneath her, ready to defend her if necessary, but he didn't advance or make any threatening moves. "See?" Hana said to both Baum and the other grimscales. "We can all be friends. There's enough room in the forest for everyone." After several long minutes of tense standoff, the lead grimscale made a sound that might have been puzzlement rather than aggression. Slowly, the 3 creatures backed away and disappeared into the forest, leaving Hana and Baum to continue their journey in peace. High above in their monitoring stations, Rilthani scientists watched their instruments with growing disbelief. Their readings showed not just one impossible event, but a series of them. A human child was riding an apex predator. The same predator was avoiding confrontation with its own kind to protect the human. And somehow, the child seemed to be communicating with multiple grimscales at once. "This is beyond equipment malfunction," Dr. Kilmar whispered to his colleagues. "We're witnessing something that rewrites everything we thought we knew about these creatures." But down in the forest, Hana was simply enjoying the adventure of traveling with her new best friend, completely unaware that she was changing the course of galactic science with every step they took together. After 8 days of searching, Chief Scientist Carvex finally received the signal his team had been desperately hoping for. Deep in the crystal forest, their long-range sensors had detected human life signs. Against all odds, the missing child was still alive. "Prepare the rescue. Hovercrafts." Carvex ordered his team of 12 Rilthani scientists and security officers, but approach with extreme caution. If the child has survived this long in Grimscale territory, she may be injured or in hiding. We cannot afford to frighten her into running deeper into the forest. The rescue team flew their silent hovercrafts just above the treetops, following the sensor readings toward a small clearing beside a winding stream. As they descended, Carvex expected to find a terrified, possibly wounded human child hiding in the undergrowth, barely clinging to life after days of avoiding the planet's most dangerous predators. What he found instead defied every law of nature. He thought he understood. In the center of the clearing sat the largest grimscale he had ever seen, easily 9 feet tall at the shoulder with armor plating that gleamed like polished metal in the alien sunlight. And perched comfortably on the creature's broad back was a small human girl with dark hair, carefully weaving bright yellow flowers into the thick fur around the grimscale's neck. The massive predator was making a sound that Carvex had never heard before in all his years of studying these creatures. It was a deep, continuous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. The sound was almost musical, like the purring of some enormous contented cat. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Velnash, one of the team's behavioral specialists. "Grimscales don't make those sounds. They roar, they growl, they hiss when threatened, but they don't purr." "Stay back," Carvex commanded as several team members moved closer for a better look. "That creature could kill us all before we could even activate our defense shields." But the little girl had already noticed them. She looked up from her flower braiding work and waved cheerfully, as if she were greeting neighbors over a backyard fence rather than sitting on top of a deadly apex predator. "Hi there," she called out in perfect Korean accented English. "Are you here to help me find my Appa and Iyama? I've been looking for them for days." Carvex felt his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Child, please remain very still," he said carefully. "We are here to rescue you, but you must not make any sudden movements that might anger the creature." Hana tilted her head, looking genuinely confused. "Anger bomb? Why would he be angry? He's not scary at all. Watch this." Before anyone could stop her, she leaned forward and patted the grimscale's massive head. "Bomb, sit." The creature immediately lowered its hindquarters to the ground, sitting like an enormous dog. The Rilthani rescue team stood frozen in shock. "Good boy," Hana praised, then looked back at the aliens. "See? He's very well behaved. Bomb, lie down." The grimscale stretched out on its belly, still purring contentedly. Hana slid down from his back and stood beside his enormous head, looking tiny in comparison. "Now roll over," she said with a giggle. The massive creature actually rolled onto its side, displaying its armored belly to the sky while continuing to make those impossible purring sounds. Hana laughed and rubbed his stomach like he was an oversized puppy. "And now the best trick," she announced proudly. "Bomb, play dead." The grimscale immediately went completely limp, closing its golden eyes and letting its tongue loll out of its mouth. For several seconds, it looked exactly like a deceased apex predator. "Okay, you can stop now," Hana said, and Bomb immediately opened his eyes and lifted his head, looking quite pleased with himself. Dr. Velnash dropped her scientific scanner, and it clattered loudly on the crystalline ground. 300 years of research," she whispered. 300 years, and we never knew they could be trained like domestic animals. Karvek stepped closer, still maintaining what he considered a safe distance. Child, what is your name? How long have you been with this creature? I'm Park Hana, she replied politely, just as her parents had taught her. And this is Bomb. We've been friends for 8 days now. He takes very good care of me. Friends? Karvex repeated, his voice cracking slightly. You consider this predator to be your friend? Of course he's my friend, Hana said, as if the question were silly. He was hurt when I found him, so I cleaned his cuts and shared my food with him. He was lonely, just like me. We helped each other. She climbed back onto Bomb's back and gave him an affectionate hug around his thick neck. He brings me the sweetest fruit from the tall trees, and he keeps me warm at night, and he protects me from the scary snake things that have too many eyes. He's the best friend I've ever had. Bomb responded to her hug by turning his massive head and gently nuzzling her shoulder, careful not to use too much force with his powerful neck muscles. We need to return you to your parents immediately, Karvek said, finally finding his voice again. They are very worried about you. Please come with us now, but Hana shook her head firmly. I'm not leaving without Bomb. If I go away, he'll be all alone again, and that will make him very sad. I can't do that to my friend. Child, that creature cannot come with us. It's far too dangerous to transport, and it belongs in this forest. Bomb. Isn't dangerous, Hana protested. He only gets upset when other Grimscales try to be mean to me. The rest of the time, he's gentle and kind and smart. Watch. She whispered something in Bomb's ear, and the massive creature stood up carefully, making sure she was secure on his back. Then he began to walk in a perfect circle around the clearing, his steps so smooth and controlled that Hana didn't even need to hold on. He can walk backwards too, she announced, and Bomb immediately reversed direction, stepping carefully over rocks and fallen branches without looking behind him. The Rilthani scientists exchanged glances of amazement. In their centuries of study, they had documented Grimscales as purely instinctual hunters with limited cognitive abilities. Yet this child was demonstrating problem-solving skills, emotional intelligence, and complex learned behaviors that rivaled some of the galaxy's most intelligent species. This changes everything, Dr. Velnash murmured. If Grimscales are capable of this level of interaction, we've been completely wrong about their true nature. Karvex activated his communication device. Command Center, this is Rescue Team Alpha. We have located the missing human child. She is uninjured and in the company of a domesticated Grimscale. The response was immediate and filled with static from disbelief. Repeat that last part, Karvex. Did you say domesticated? Affirmative. The child has somehow formed a partnership with an apex predator. Request immediate consultation with the Galactic Council. We have a situation here that requires policy review at the highest levels. Meanwhile, Hana continued playing with Bomb, completely unaware that she had just turned 3 centuries of scientific understanding upside down. All she knew was that she had found a friend who needed her as much as she needed him, and she wasn't about to abandon him now. The moment Kim Dojin and Lee Minji stepped out of the rescue transport, they could hardly believe their eyes. There, little girl was sitting on the back of a creature so massive it looked like something from a nightmare, casually braiding flowers into its fur as if she were decorating a garden. Hana! Minji cried out, tears streaming down her face. Iyama Appa! Hana shouted back, her face lighting up with pure joy. She whispered something to Bomb, and the enormous Grimscale carefully lowered himself to the ground so she could slide down from his back. The reunion was everything her parents had dreamed of during those 8 terrifying days of not knowing if their daughter was alive. Hana ran into their arms and they held her so tightly that she squeaked in protest. Dojin buried his face in her hair, overwhelmed with relief, while Minji kept repeating, my baby, in Korean between her sobs. But even in the middle of their emotional reunion, both parents couldn't help but notice the massive creature watching them intently. Bomb remained perfectly still, but his golden eyes tracked every movement, ready to intervene if he sensed any threat to his young friend. It's okay, Bomb, Hana said, pulling away from her parents long enough to reassure him. These are my Appa and Iyama. They're good people." To everyone's amazement, Bam approached the family slowly, lowering his enormous head until it was level with the adults. Dojin, despite being a doctor who prided himself on staying calm in crisis situations, felt his hands shake as the apex predator studied him with those intelligent golden eyes. "He wants to meet you properly," Hana explained matter-of-factly. "You can pat his head if you want, he likes that." Minji, who had always been braver than her husband when it came to animals, reached out first. Her hand looked impossibly small against Bam's armored head, but when she gently stroked the area between his eyes, the massive creature began making that deep, contented purring sound. "He's so warm," she whispered in wonder. "And listen to that sound. He's happy." Dojin followed his wife's example, carefully placing his hand on Bam's head. The texture was unlike anything he had ever felt. Not quite like reptile scales, not quite like mammalian fur, but something uniquely alien and surprisingly pleasant to touch. "Thank you," he said quietly to the Grimscale. "Thank you for taking care of our daughter." Bam seemed to understand the gratitude in his voice because he made a soft huffing sound that almost sounded like acknowledgement. Their touching family moment was interrupted by the arrival of additional aircraft. The largest vessel bore the insignia of the Galactic Council, and when it landed, out stepped Council Leader Prexmaran himself, a distinguished Rilthani, whose blue skin had faded to silver with age, and whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. "This is unprecedented," Prexmaran announced, his musical voice carrying authority that had settled disputes between star systems. "In all our recorded history, no apex predator species has ever exhibited this type of bonding behavior with an alien species." He approached the group slowly, flanked by a dozen scientists carrying various scanning devices and recording equipment. "Child, I am Council Leader Prexmaran. I must ask you directly, how did you accomplish something that our finest xenobiologists have declared impossible?" Hana looked up at the imposing alien leader without any fear, still keeping one hand resting on Bam's side. "I didn't accomplish anything special. Bam was hurt and lonely when I found him. I helped clean his cuts and he shared his food with me. We took care of each other. But according to every study we have conducted over 3 centuries, Grimscales are purely predatory creatures with limited cognitive function and no capacity for interspecies bonding," insisted Dr. Velnash, consulting her datapad frantically. "Maybe you were studying them wrong," Hana suggested with the blunt honesty that only children possess. "Did you ever try being nice to them first?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Rilthani thought they knew about the universe. Prexmaran exchanged glances with his scientific advisors, all of whom looked deeply uncomfortable. "What my daughter means," Dojin interjected diplomatically, "is that perhaps the approach matters as much as the study itself. Hana has always had a gift with animals. Even back on Earth, stray dogs and cats would follow her home because she treated them with kindness first. Bam just needed a friend," Hana added, scratching behind the Grimscale's armored ears in a spot that made him lean into her touch like a giant cat. "Everyone needs friends, even big scary-looking creatures. They probably get lonely too." Over the following weeks, the Galactic Council found itself in an unprecedented situation. They couldn't simply take Hana away from Bam. The psychological trauma to both the child and the Grimscale could be devastating. But they also couldn't ignore the scientific implications of what had happened. The solution they arrived at was as revolutionary as the situation itself. A special preserve was established in a neutral zone between human and Rilthani space, where Hana's family could live permanently while serving as ambassadors for interspecies relations. The facility included comfortable living quarters for the humans, a vast natural habitat for Bam, and research stations where scientists could study their unprecedented partnership. "You're going to be famous," Minji told her daughter as they settled into their new home. "People across the galaxy will want to learn from what you've accomplished." But fame was already spreading in ways none of them expected. Within 3 months of Hana's rescue, reports began arriving from human colonies across the galaxy. A 7-year-old boy on Kepler 186f had befriended a pack of crystal wolves that the local authorities had declared untouchable. Twin girls on Proxima Centauri b were regularly seen playing with creatures that looked like flying manta rays, which had previously been considered too aggressive for any contact. Each report followed the same pattern: human children, acting on instinct and kindness rather than scientific caution, forming bonds with alien creatures that adult researchers had deemed impossible to approach. The Rilthani scientific community was forced to completely revise their understanding of predator behavior, interspecies communication, and the nature of intelligence itself. They created an entirely new classification system called human-compatible species, a category that seemed to expand every time they updated their databases. It appears, Prexmeron admitted during a galactic broadcast that was watched by billions of beings across hundreds of worlds, that humanity possesses an intuitive understanding of consciousness and companionship that transcends the barriers we thought were absolute. They see potential for friendship where we saw only danger. Back on their preserve, Hannah remained blissfully unaware of the scientific revolution she had started. She was too busy teaching Baum how to play hide-and-seek among the crystal formations, planning their next adventure through the glowing forests, and proving every day that the universe was far more wonderful and connected than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from advanced technology or centuries of research, but from a child's simple belief that every living thing deserves kindness, understanding, and friendship.